So for me, guys, this is one of the most deliciously fun DS9 episodes. It can't be the most deliciously fun because it's based on the most deliciously fun TOS episode. So just out of age and homage, I must maintain loyalty to the original, The Trouble with Tribbles. But this was so revelatory for me when I saw it from a technical aspect. The placing of the characters directly into the scenes was something I had seen in Forrest Gump, but I had never seen on television before. And the technical whiz bangs for that were just amazing. In doing some of the research for this podcast, I found out the director actually went back and used lenses from the 60s to recreate the look for the scenes he filmed. And obviously, the part with Cisco and Dax, where they didn't interact with Kirk and Spock, but she got to see Spock's eyes, and there was a witty bit of dialogue as Kirk spoke into the speaker unit on the aisle. The fight scene, it took a week to film that scene alone because it was so technically hit your mark kind of difficulty. And then I have to say my favorite part was when Chief O'Brien was in the lineup and Kirk actually spoke to him and Chief O'Brien spoke back. I can still remember that from the original show and thought it was great then. And that was my favorite, where they were able to put DS9 characters directly into the trials and tribulations. The story itself was fun. The Klingon character, the actor who played Arvin, was the same actor who played him in the original series, one of just a handful of actors to be able to have that arc within their professional career. And he played him to the T. He was the same sniveling little snide worm that he was in The Trouble with Tribbles. I know, Megan, you're probably going to talk to us about the temporal police. And they were perfect.
First note.
Were just
you know me too
perfect.
Well.
Yes. And actually, I thought about our exploration of that with Loki. That's what it brought to mind for me. So the story was fun. The technical whiz bangs were fun. Some of the underlying stories that I came across, and I actually had to pull them up to get them right. The first one, which I had not heard, was when the writers were trying to come up with an episode for the then 25th anniversary of Star Trek, and that's what this episode was built around. Ira Stephen Bear and his team had gone out one night to a pizza joint in Beverly Hills to talk about figure out their storyline, and they actually saw Arn Darvin, the actor who played him, Charlie Brill, at the pizza joint with his wife. And he went up and asked him if he would be interested in reprising that role, which is apparently something you can't do in Hollywood because all actors have agents and negotiations go through the agent. And Brill told him on the spot he would love to make history twice, and even to the point where he thought Gene Roddenberry would be proud of that recreation of his role. And as Ira Stephen Bear said, if that doesn't prove God's a DS9 fan, I don't know what does. And it was a good thing we didn't have Chinese that night. So that was a coincidence. But here's one other one, and I'm going to have to pull it up and read it because it was so stunning to me, and I hope I can find it now. The Robert Zimmerman, I think, was a production designer on TNG, and he had been filming a TNG movie, the first TNG movie, during this part of DS9. And so he was working on that, Herman Zimmerman, excuse me. And he just returned to DS9 from work. Actually, it was the second TNG movie, First Contact. Yeah. And he noticed that the art department was drawing up the plans to reconstruct the hallways of the Enterprise using floor plans they found on the Paramount lot, but the floor plans had an incorrect scale of the Enterprise's corridors, and they had them at 7.5 feet. And he knew from his work that the corridors were supposed to be 12 feet wide. And so he actually told them that, and they made that correction. And I just, once again, thought that, coincidence was fascinating. So they got the size right. There's so much. This is just a literally fest of Easter eggs and treats for the eye and references. The one that just sent me through the roof early on was, even more than Dax wanting to see Koloff in his prime, was when Cisco said, I'd love to talk to Kirk about the Gorn. And I love the Gorn. Everyone loves the Gorn. The actor who played the Gorn was a working stiff making $15 an hour. And he goes to conferences now and people go nuts because he was the Gorn. And so that reference really resonated with me. But I know you guys, I'm sure, have equal amounts. So Megan, you want to give us your opening thoughts?
Absolutely. And you absolutely called it. My first one was about the time police, or the from the temporal bureau. And I'm so utterly delighted with the fact that these people who have the most fascinating, important job in the world are just these humorless bureaucrats. They look so at home at like a Department of Motor Vehicles, or maybe being an actuary of some kind, and they're just talking to people who have had these insane adventures, and they're just like, there's paperwork. Do you understand the paperwork? I just, the whole concept I think is absolutely delightful. And I also kind of like what a trope that is through different science fiction fantasies. Like, there's no temporal authority that isn't completely dry and humorless. So I think it's just kind of, it's almost like this pervasive truth in the multiverse, is that people who work with time travel, have pocket protectors, and maybe, for fun, raise goldfish. Like, it's marvelous. I loved a lot of the things that you mentioned too, Tom. Like, this is just, the way it was done visually was incredible. The composite images, the wonderful editing. And I think the way the different characters reacted to being back in time, I found so fun as well. Like, O'Brien kind of felt like he thought it was really cool, but he's along for the ride. He's a little goal focused. Dax just being a giant horn dog for everything in the whole set. That from the time period itself, the different historical characters that she remembers, of course. And I think it was implied she maybe knew Dr. McCoy a little bit well. I think that was perhaps
very
implied.
strongly implied.
Yeah.
He had the hands of a surgeon.
Yeah.
But I thought that was great, and I think she had all of the joy and the delight that the temporal authority should have had, just with the situation. As perilous as it may have been, she's just like, no, this is great. This is like going back in time. This is a nostalgia trip for me. I'm going to have so much fun with it. And I like how they brought in a little bit the trope of, let's say, being an active participant in your own progeneration, when Bashir met the woman he believes is his grandmother and was just like, no, I must. What if we get back to DS9 and I don't exist anymore? So that was excellently done as well. And overall, I thought Worf was also really, really funny. And I love the Klingon Tribble relationship, just as something that exists in the universe. And so Worf's reaction to the Tribbles is marvelous. I like that they destroyed the entire homeworld. And it really reminds me of, Murphy, I know you know about this, the Great Emu War in Australia in the 1990s.
Which they lost.
It is the only war on record that has been lost to birds.
Yeah.
It just has that energy, I feel, if you get this warrior army fighting, fat guinea pigs to the extent of total domination, total annihilation. What a treat. What a great time. I really like this episode too. Murphy, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a fun one. I mean, it's never been one on my lists. I love it a lot. It isn't one that I often skip, but I like it. And I like, Tom, when you were talking about, plans for the ship, and it it really goes into beautiful close-up shots of the original Enterprise, and I like that. I like when they're doing the repair work, and you see that red grill and the colored pipes. It's nice. We don't get a lot of like close-up shots in the original series of just how weirdly laid out and pretty everything from that era is. There's a really good, I forget who, I think it was one of the original set directors from TOS. When TNG came out in that first season, and he was livid because he's like, I designed the ship to be a naval vessel and to look sort of like a naval vessel, but to have charm. He's like, the revamp makes, it looks like a Hilton from the early 80s. Everything's got lounges and palm trees, and there's, like stairs in the middle of the corridor, and everything's beige. I like the look. I really like that they did a nice job, specifically on K7 with the lighting. You come into the bar, and there's this backlight of like blues and purples. It's so pretty. And also, because to speak to your, humanist bureaucrats, everybody in the future looks bored. They look bored and sedate. If you go to the lounge on the Enterprise, there's just nothing to do. There's one chessboard and a bunch of empty tables. The bar has nothing to do. Like everybody looks very bored. So I thought that's kind of interesting. And look, Kirk's lunch, he's having coffee and a chicken sandwich. That's the most boring lunch you could possibly think of. Yeah, everybody just seems really like they're mellow. Maybe they're happy, but they just seem kind of, but it's fun, and it's neat to see DS9 characters sort of interact in that space. Because DS9 has its own sort of interesting aesthetic palette, and it's neat to see the characters taken out of that. The DS9 tends to be very dark, very shadowy, and to put them somewhere with all these bright primary colors, it's really neat. I liked it a lot. It was fun. I've watched it about 3 times this week, getting ready for this, and I watched the original episode too, and it was, it's a lot of fun.
So Murphy, when I initially watched this episode in the 90s, the question that came up in the bar was a question I had always wondered the answer to, and that question was, in the TOS, the Klingons looked physically very different than they did starting with TNG going forward. And that question came up because I think it was Odo and Bashir didn't recognize the Klingons at the bar. Could you tell us that story?
Okay. So I'm a little fuzzy on the exact specifics because it's been years since I watched it, but the way that it's explained in universe, the official explanation is something called the augment virus. The augment virus has to do with it's an arc from Enterprise. I believe it's in the 2nd season of Enterprise. And basically what had happened was that remnants from eugenics wars, these augmented humans, these sort of genetically enhanced humans had come along, and to make a long story short, the Empire got involved, and they were freaked out that Starfleet was going to start staffing all their ships with these augmented humans. And so they tried making their own, and something went wrong, and the DNA basically caused these Klingons to revert to looking like non-Klingons. They sort of, you can see it in the episode where the guy gets the virus, and his ridges go back, and he sort of turns more human-like. Something, I believe it's because some sort of flu virus got mixed in with it, and it genetically altered the Klingons. Eventually, they will go back to looking like normal Klingons. We see this in what is it? I think the first time we see the Klingons in the original series movies is Search for Spock, and they're already starting to look more like what we see later on in TNG. Because that would have been, mid-'80s and they go from there. But that's generally the explanation. Then it took a few generations after this. And keep in mind, this starts before the Federation is even around. So this is well before Kirk's time, 100 and some odd years. But that's the official explanation. That's it. They explain it in Enterprise. They do a few things. I think it's part of it has to do with Data's great-great-grandfather, something like that, some geneticist. But yeah, it's in an Enterprise arc.
I love the way
So what,
Worf, when questioned, just said, I see what you're seeing, and you're not crazy, but we do not speak of it. I will take no further questions. There will be no discussion.
So I just also have to say that the two time temporal agents are named Luxie and Dulmar, which I had not known that they were anagrams of Mulder and Scully.
Oh, I didn't see that, but that's amazing.
Yeah. And if that doesn't warm your cackles, I don't know what does.
Oh, that's good.
What an homage there. But there were so many Easter eggs in this. I think it was in the show The Cloudminders. The High Proctor's daughter had eyes for Spock. And here it's Dax thinks Spock's is just the cat's meow as opposed to the ladies' man, Jim Kirk. I loved it when Dax gave the number of tribbles, which, having memorized every piece of dialogue from the original show, I knew that was the right answer as she spin out. But there were also some homages to other Star Trek episodes. And the biggest for me was at the very end when Sisko takes the duty roster to Kirk to tell him what an honor it's been to basically meet him, but he says to serve with him. And that comes out of Mirror Mirror at the end of that show where he talks to, I think, I can't remember the ensign's name, but, and they replaced her with Sisko, and it absolutely worked for the scene. So there was that. Odo saying that it was his observation that humans liked things that were warm and fuzzy and made noises. Straight out of TOS as well. So many interesting or lovely just Easter eggs. What did you guys think of the actual plot? Did it work for you? Does it work generally within DS9, recognizing it was designed to be a celebration of the 25th anniversary of TOS? Megan?
I loved it. I mean, it was, it's really kind of out of step with a lot of other things that were going on with DS9, but it was made with such love and such joy. Not just, by the creative team that made it, but also I think by the actors playing their characters as their characters. It was this, fun and joyful and loving experience that they got to share with the original episode, basically being the guest. It was the star, and using it that way. So I think, even if it didn't really kind of fit in with what was happening on DS9 or what was going on, I think it was so lovingly crafted that it doesn't really matter. Like you said, it's a special episode. It doesn't need to fit in with everything else. And it's, and on the one hand, not taking itself too seriously. It's having fun. It's being a little ridiculous, but just with such sincere affection.
Yeah.
That I think that comes across more strongly than anything else.
Yeah.
Murphy?
Yeah, it really is. It's, I didn't realize that it was a 25th anniversary of when it came out. It really does a perfect job. I mean, it's like that moment in the very first episode of DS9 where they go from the TNG theme straight into the DS9 theme as the Enterprise leaves with that nice handover. It's really a loving kind of tribute in a lot of ways. And I wanted to talk about the original episode just a little bit because it's a great episode. I mean, it's fantastic. Cyrano Jones gets, 19 years for transportation of a dangerous organism? That's 19 years for carrying a Tribble. That's a long prison sentence, even for the Federation, where you could be released from a penal colony after 7 years for murder. That's a long time. Yeah, it's fun. It plays into the original episode really well. Just like, it's Julian's hair in this episode is absolutely ridiculous. I love it. But yeah, for the plot, it works really well. it's an interesting one. I mean, and it sort of plays on the whole poison grain thing and the tribbles and, with the bomb in space. I just wonder if the Enterprise not noticing a big explosion off the side of the ship, but, that's part of the plot. But yeah, it's loads of fun.
The other part of the plot that I actually liked quite a bit was the Orb of Time, and probably a device to get us there 200 years previously. But we have another orb, and here we have the Cardassians returning an orb. Very unusual for that whole story arc in DS9. And as we get to a little bit later podcast, we'll see that the Cardassians may not be as friendly as that. So I was intrigued by that, and that Kira was able to figure out how to manipulate the Orb of Time. Any thoughts on that?
Well, there's a reason why the Cardassians are giving the orb back to the Bajorans at this point in time, because the Obsidian Order no longer exists, and the orbs were held by the Obsidian Order, and they were being, as what Sir Cisco says, turned upside down in some lab on Cardassia. Well, there is no central command anymore. There is no Obsidian Order. The civilian government is taking control of Cardassia. And while Cardassia is fighting the Klingons, technically they're a little bit allied with the Federation at this point, sort of. And I think the civilian government kind of wants to make political inroads with Bajor and with the Federation because ostensibly they're, helping them fight off the Klingons. I mean, they're delivering industrial replicators to Cardassia to help with the war effort and stuff like that. So yeah, it makes sense that this nicer, kinder, greener Cardassian government would want to say, okay, well, we have an orb. We're not going to admit to having all of them, but, we'll do it as a gesture of goodwill and we'll give it back to Bajor. As you can see, this is going to happen a few times. I mean, Bajor does this. I think earlier on they give another one out. But yeah, I think the rest of them are definitely still on Cardassia, or at this point, maybe gone. It'd be interesting to see what happens to the orbs at the end of the series. I'd be very curious to know where they all ended up.
We may be able to answer that.
Yeah.
Tom, I had one question from you. I had one question for you, actually, because there was that moment when they first went back in time. And the team on the Defiant is kind of wondering what's going on, what's happening, and they come up on the view screen, and it's the Enterprise. And everyone who had an emotional connection with the Enterprise, and so they conveyed that so well. How did you feel when, at that point in the episode, when they went back in time, they realized where they were, and they saw this unbelievably mythologically important ship? How did that feel for you as a watcher?
Well, for me, it was magical. Just magical. But Star Trek for me is pretty much magical, so I can hear the theme and it puts a smile on my face. Okay, well, maybe a final thought or two. Megan?
Yeah, so I love the final shot in this episode with the Tribbles starting to fill up Quark's bar, even with a little Tribble on top of his head. And all I could think about, for the next half hour or so after watching the show, was how much the rest of the crew was going to enjoy watching Worf go absolutely ham on these Tribbles in Quarks. And what a great post-show that would have been. And so that's joyful from beginning to end, this episast is my final thought. What about you, Cuz?
That's that's an interesting point you raised about the Tribbles coming back, because one of the last things that one of the temporal agents said, they're like, oh, well, we could be living in another timeline right now. Earlier in the episode, Worf implies that the Tribble homeworld was wiped out completely. So they brought back, 23rd century Tribbles to the 24th century, effectively restarting or changing historical patterns. Now, maybe that was always meant to happen, but I would really like to see how they deal with an ecological menace like this. It's interesting. So maybe it is an alternate timeline. Who knows? No, altogether, I think it's a fantastic episode. Ties everything nicely together. It's fun. There's a really good selection to pick right in the middle of all this doom and gloom that we've been, worrying about with DS9. It's a very fun episode.
For me, it brought back memories of watching it where I was really blown away with the technical whiz bangs of what they were able to do. It wasn't green screen. It was literally putting the actors in the same film in a way I'd not seen on television before. And I just love it when you have a technical innovation that advances the medium. And I really saw that. Obviously, anything TOS is going to really move me. So it was a lot of fun. Whether it moved the storyline along or not, I don't care.
Yeah.
I got to see Jim Kirk and Spock, and Spock does have great eyes. What can I say? Okay, guys, we're going to go a little bit darker next time, so I can't wait.
Until next time, folks.